Hey, what's up, everybody? I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about old school collecting and just getting into bands versus new school, if you want to call it that. We all know that you can find anything on the internet today. You go on to YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. You can find anything that you want at the touch of a button, right at your fingertips. In most cases, if there's a CD that you've been seeking for ever, chances are, if you're willing to put out the money, it's there in most cases. Didn't used to be that way. It used to be a lot harder to deal with when you didn't have the internet, didn't have things at our fingertips. So how did we do it? How do we deal with it? How do we find out about these bands? How did we learn about stuff coming out? How did we find things? So I guess start by talking about how did we find bands back in the day before the rise of the internet. So we're talking the 70s and the 80s and into the 90s. Well, it started with something that you don't see a lot these days, the compilation album. So this is from like 1984. This is a heavy metal compilation album that features Sabbath, Y&T, Dawkins, Zebra, Dio, Crocus, Kiss, Rainbow, Iron Maiden, Rush, Triumph, Twisted Sister, and Van Halen. But even before that, in the 70s, for those that didn't necessarily like metal, there was a wonderful label called K-Tel that had all sorts of compilations. And so if you didn't want to necessarily go out and buy the whole album, you'd go to the store and you'd look at the K-Tel records and you'd see maybe there's something on there, like maybe you wanted Rock of Ages from Def Leppard, but you didn't want to buy the whole record. It's on here. And then in with it, there's a Maniac by Michael Sembello, and Sweet Dreams Are Made of This by the Eurythmics, and different things like that. So it's kind of like, here's one more for you. It's kind of like YouTube. It's kind of like iTunes, where you can go and listen to just the songs you want to hear. But still, you were forced to buy a full album. You were forced to buy the full album at full price. Usually K-Tel albums weren't that expensive, but you were still forced to buy the full album, even if you only wanted it for one song. There was a lot of do-it-yourself, late 70s, early 80s, and there's a hardcore band called Crass that did their own compilations called Bullshit Detector. This is Bullshit Detector Volume 3. Let me just tell you, this is from 1984. There's a band on here that now is huge. Now, I'm not saying that this compilation helped to get them noticed, but I don't know if you can see it. Napalm Death. This is before Napalm Death had recorded Scum. This is before, from looking at the lineup, it is not a single person that is even in the band on Scum. It's in this back when they did the hardcore stuff. So you've got these kind of compilations coming out with all these bands that are on here. And so the punk movement was really kind of big on that. I mean, it was, these bands weren't like the K-Tel bands, you know, where I'm sure the bands got a percentage of the money, not much, but they got a percentage of the money. And so they would, they get something back. These bands were looking for exposure, so they got in a compilation for exposure. You've got more. Let Them Eat Jelly Beans. This is an Alternative Tentacles, Jello Biafra's label. Side 1 has the big name, like DOA, Flipper, Black Flag, Bad Brains, DK, Circle Jerks, and all that. And side 2 has got a bunch of unknown, smaller bands that they featured on here. Here's another one from Alternative Tentacles, Not So Quiet on the Western Front. Couple on a label called Go, rap music for rap people. Has DK, DOA, Circle Jerks, Flipper, Bad Brains, CSOL, Crucifix. Another one's got MDC, DRI is on here, Minutemen, JFA, bunch of punk, so those of you that know punk at all. SST, Black Flag, the label they were on, just a compilation of a bunch of stuff, including the Meat Puppets, who I believe kind of went on to do kind of more mainstream or not necessarily punk stuff. Then you have metal bands that are under the radar that want to get their attention out to them. So you have compilations like this, the first ever Bathory recordings on here, before the self-titled Bathory. You have the Metal Massacre series, which Metal Blade put out. That was the first time Metallica was on there. You know, and speaking of Metal Blade, then they had just gone crazy. So you got Metal Massacre 1, Metal Massacre 2, and 3. And in the midst of this, you've got bands like Overkill and Slayer. Like I said, Metallica, Rat was on this. Black and Blue, so it wasn't just all metal, like speed metal, thrash metal, and things like that. There were regular metal bands that Brian Slager was noticing and putting them on there. So a lot of the who's who of the Metal Blade roster back in the day. And then they put out a few more in the late 90s. There were a few more like these last few, or newer. And then there's the best of Metal Blade. But you know, they did things like they have the Metal Blade box set. It's got a huge collection of different bands on it and everything. So that was our internet, you know. Again, Metal Meister, they just went nuts. Another collection that actually was the first time I heard Raven was called Metal Killers. And again, it had a mix of stuff from Sabbath, UFO, Michael Schenker, Judas Priest, Girl School, Tank, Venom, Tokyo Blade, Rothschild, Raven. It's just a hodgepodge of stuff from 70s and 80s, just all collected together. And they did a second volume as well. Then you had Music for Nations, who Metallica, Creeping Death, that was on that. Wasp, Fuck Like a Beast had to be released on that, so that's on here. Merciful Fate stuff is on here. This is all just singles that were released on Music for Nations, and they just compiled the stuff. So Jumping the Fire's on here, Fuck Like a Beast is on here, Creeping Death's on here, Legs Diamond, bands like Eric Martin, Alaska, if you guys ever heard them, just kind of a straightforward hard rock band. Again, another Music for Nations, Welcome to the Metal Zone. Wendy O. Williams is on here, Merciful Fate, Loudness, Sabotage, Exodus, Rods, all over the place. Again, giving you the opportunity. I'm just going to kind of run through these heavy metal records. It's got Acceptiano, Reckless, Rothschild, Metal Blade Volume 1, Metal Blade Volume 2, Metal Blade Volume 3, which is really the albums that really turned me on to a lot of the Metal Blade catalog. Speed Metal Hell, Speed Metal Hell 2. There's just so many bands on those that you just got a full feel for that. The 90s continued, so the bands on Nuclear Blast Records were featured on Death Is Just the Beginning. They had a series. This is the very first one, so you've got bands like Atrocity, Disharmonic Orchestra, Abomination, Pungent Stench, Benediction, Deathstrike. Some of the key basic bands that started off on Nuclear Blast back in the day. And then they did, if I can find everything here, so they did the CDs. So here's the one I held up on vinyl. But then you've got Volume 2, 21 tracks. Volume 3 was a 2-disc set, so then you've got close to 40 tracks. Volume 4 is 2-disc set. Volume 5 is a 2-disc set. And Volume 6 is a 2-disc set, Digipack. Volume 7 was a 3-disc set. And a lot of stuff on here was unreleased tracks or tracks that were issued before the album came out, so you kind of got a teaser taster of the stuff. They did some videos. And that's the other thing I wanted to talk about too. You know, you got YouTube now. We didn't have YouTube. And hey, well, guess what? Headbangers Ball didn't play Bolt Thrower and Carcass on a regular basis. Now, they played Carcass once Heartwork came out, but you didn't see the earlier videos. You didn't see a lot of like Entombed Left Hand Path. You didn't see a lot of that stuff. So you had to get these videos to see that stuff. And again, you're forking out money and you're not just clicking on a button. There's labels. Nuclear Blast did more. There's Voyager. This is a 3-disc set, and along with Voyager, the CD, they had a VHS with videos from the bands. There's a sampler, which they did a lot of, and I'll get into that more when we go into the mail order part. 20 years of Nuclear Blast. Again, just it's not even been open because most of these bands I've heard, but it's a 4 CD set. Of stuff from Nuclear Blast. This was kind of cool. It was Out of the Dark, Into the Light, 2 albums, and it was like bands would do covers of other bands' songs. And it was just kind of, from the 80s or different stuff like that. And it was just, there's a really cool compilation. Century Media was another one that was huge in the early 90s. And so here's a 10-year anniversary box set, just packaged really cool. It got a huge thick book, and at the end it runs through every single release that was on Century Media. So if you were kind of curious about that, that was a way you could find out what you were missing on the label or what you should look for. You had also, there's covering 20 Years of Extremes. This is another one on their label where they had bands covering each other's songs. There's a couple, oh, there's even more Nuclear Blast here, shit. Nuclear Blast Blu-ray, Nuclear Blast DVD, concert series, and V8 videos. There's Metal Blade. Back in the late 80s, you had one thing I forgot too, Doomsday News. So videos again, you had Corner and Tankard and Creator and Sado, Raged, Voivod, Celtic Frost, Halloween, Destruction and Mayhem, Vendetta. All sorts of videos on here you would not see on Headbangers Ball. And then the more Century Media, their DVDs of stuff. This has got 3 DVDs of just videos done by bands that got made and would never get played on mainstream radio. And you had small labels like Osmos put out a lot of the Marduk stuff, a lot of the black metal stuff in the mid 90s, and even they had a compilation DVD with stuff. JL America, if you guys remember JL America at all, this is a sampler from JL America. At Death's Door, this is a Roadrunner, early Roadrunner sampler that has Death doing God of Thunder, which was later released on the reissue as a bonus track, but that's where it was first appeared. Megaforce Records, Deeper Into the Vault. This has got a track, a Testament track with Steve Sousa on vocals from the original Legacy demo. This is a later Alternative Tentacles compilation. And then the band that really got it started for me, or the label, was Earache, and this compilation right here, Grind Crusher, Napalm Death, Carcass, Entombed, Carnage, Bolt Thrower, who did I miss? Mighty Force, Sweet Tooth, a bunch of bands that you would never even heard of, Lawnmower Death, Nocturnus, Old Lady Drivers, Filthy Christians, Hellbastard, Terrorizer, Repulsion, Godflesh. All of them are on here, and I mean, the first time I'm hearing this stuff, and I'm blown the fuck away. It's just incredible. They did a box set, which is where I got this little thing, but this little kind of neat tin that has 3 CDs of stuff from 86 to 2000. And then they have this little Japanese earplug that's kind of got a sampler, some of the bands from the label. It looks like stuff from when they all got signed to Columbia. And then, honestly, there's very few newer compilations that I see out there. Mike Rappel had contacted me recently from Riotous Indignation from Chicago. He's feeling the same way. We need to get these compilations out here. So we live in a different era where we don't really, have the need to do these compilations, but it's cool. It gives people an opportunity to have something tangible, because there's nothing like taking a record or a CD, looking at it, opening it up, sitting back, listening to the music, especially vinyl, man. Especially vinyl, but even CD, just kicking back, having a cold one, opening that CD, reading the liner notes, just looking the bands. And then you have the internet now, so you can look them up and check them out. But again, this is probably the only newest compilation I have. This is the band's Merciless Death, Enforcer, Toxic Holocaust, Warbringer are on this one. There's a couple other bands. It's the newest one, Speed Kills Again. But I don't really see a lot of comps. One other thing that you saw a lot of, and I'll move on to my next point, was magazines. Now come on over here really quick. These totes here, I don't know if you can see them here. I'm not sure where there's one there, and there's these here. Full of magazines. And, that was how we read about the bands. That's how we found out about bands back then. And there were some really cool magazines. For example, Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles. These are early pressings. or issues. This is issue 14. I have a few earlier than that, but they were just done black and white. They later became a bigger magazine and had pressings like this, or issues like this, full color, full on. You'd buy them at Barnes and Noble. But this early stuff, this was all released in. Martin Popoff was, I think, one of the editors. I mean, he may have been in charge or may have actually started this. I don't know for sure. I didn't do a lot of my homework on that specific thing. But on every issue, there was something called knuckle tracks. Every issue. And there was a sampler from a ton of bands, and it was attached, and it was just part of the cost of the magazine. And so you got a magazine, you were able to read about the bands, and then you had a sampler of different bands that you could listen to. There's another magazine here. Let me find it for you guys. SOD magazine. Now this magazine, this was a little bit harder to come by, and looking through my totes, I have way more than I really remember having. But there again, this label had, well, that's Zero Tolerance. So there's tons and tons of labels that had these CDs attached to them. But there was, I can find it now for you. Samplers on each one of these. But it focused on labels. So this particular issue was Full Moon Productions. This one here was free CD from Unique Leader. There was one from a Rotting Christ label, Unisound. That's how I heard Rotting Christ the first time, and that was back in the mid '90s, early '90s. Before, actually, it was before Triarchy of the Lost Lovers was released, so it had to have been before like '94, '95. So again, that was how we heard the stuff. We didn't have the internet, we didn't have all that stuff, so that was how we heard the stuff, and it was incredible to find that stuff, but it was difficult, especially if you lived in smaller communities and you lived in the U.S. and this stuff is all happening overseas. That was your only avenue, is to get this. And in these boxes, there are tons and tons of underground zines. There's about every issue of Metal Maniacs, which was like basically Hit Parader's version of a metal magazine, but it did cover a lot of stuff, although they had some personal issues. The editor for the longest time of Metal Maniacs was a vegan, and she was adamantly opposed to Glenn Benton and all of his spewings about having animal sacrifices in churches and stuff, and all the crap he used to spread around about what he did. And so they would not print anything about deicide for a long time, which, you know, in media you should be non-biased, but we won't get into that. So you get to hear all this stuff. How the hell do you get a hold of it? How do you find it? You know, because it's not like you can call your friends and say, hey man, let me borrow this, or hey, can you zip me this MP3? Can you email me this MP3? Can I buy this on Bandcamp? No, you can't. So how did you do it? Well, you got on mailing lists. So this is a mailing list, this kind of a mail order catalog from Relapse Records. This is from, let's see if there's a date on it. Of course there isn't. But I would say it's got Nile on it, so mid to late 90s. Resound Records. Nuclear Blast. This is from 2001, but still, 2001, the internet was still not a driving force. As a matter of fact, I believe back then, it was like some cell plans now, where you pay for data. You paid for so many minutes of internet time, and then if you went over, you lost your internet service for the remainder of the month, and all that for all you young ones out there. You could do mail order. Then one of the best places to do mail order was a place called Metal Disc, and the lady that ran Metal Disc, her name is Lila, and we just got, you can see here, I had highlighted as I went through each new catalog came out, I highlighted what I had. Just so that I'd look through and I could make it easier to look at and see what I was missing. But this was my way of knowing what I had and what I needed. We called her one time and she said, hey, I got a bunch of vinyl in my garage that I have in storage. I want to get rid of it. She unloaded a bunch of it on us for like $5 or less, including the first two Angel Dust and just a bunch of really cool stuff. There is one other avenue that you could use back then. This is from 1995. It's CD International. It basically lists about every CD that was available worldwide, any genre, and it has stuff like the artist album title, the release code for the US, UK, Germany, France, Japan, and it just runs down the whole gamut of everything. So if you were trying to order from your local record store and you wanted to have as much information as possible, you would use one of these. So that was how you would do it. Now, say you're in a record store and you're like me and money is burning a hole in your fucking pocket and you gotta buy something that day, and you see a band that you love, or you know that you love. You see a band, you don't know if you like them or not, and you don't know, should I get it? Or better yet, you're looking around like I did. I would look through A to Z before they did. Our local stores didn't have metal sections for the longest time, so everything was A to Z, so you had to flip through everything to look for any metal. And you would go through once, and I'm sure I missed something, go through again. I gotta have missed something, go through a third time, and then you kind of pinpoint in your head, I saw a few things. So, for example, one of the first things I bought from just to cover was Awaken the Guardian. And at the time, I had not heard anything off this. Later, I got the Metal Blade Volume 2, I think Prelude to the Ruin is on here. I got this strictly for the artwork. I just thought the artwork was totally kick-ass, just so cool, all the bright colors and everything, so cool. And I took it home on a whim, and I just it was a blind buy. And it was one of the best buys I've ever had. You know, with regards to buying anything on CD, or actually I bought the cassette back in the day. But as you can see, I mean, for people that weren't really into the music, they didn't really want to go to all that trouble. You know, you didn't want to read the magazines and read about bands. You didn't want to get any of the any CDs or records and read the liner notes. I mean, I remember back in the day I would read liner notes and I wouldn't recognize a third of the bands. And now I read liner notes and it's rare that I don't recognize the name of a band. But it's just because of years and years of that. And so when I do my videos, my Metal Inquisition videos, and I talk about bands, I do have to go back sometimes and kind of refresh myself, or I do want to kind of find a few little interesting tidbits about the band that maybe I don't know. But a lot of the stuff I'm speaking about is stuff I'm speaking about from up here. And a lot of that is because I spent the time and effort back in the day. And those of us that collect, even younger people that collect, they still have this mentality. Gone is the day where you go into a record store and you find this rare piece that they don't know what the hell it is, so they put $10, you know, at the time back in the 80s it was $7 or $8 on it when it was going for a lot more. Quick example, my best friend back in the mid 90s, early 2000s, he did a lot of stuff with a guy from the East Coast, which is another way you could have done it. I didn't, but he actually would buy a calling card, call this guy, and spend 4 hours on the phone. And he would play music continually for my friend John. He would walk away and just let the CD play, and then the guy'd come back every once in a while and check with John, say, do you want to keep listening or do you want something else? And he'd say, you know, go ahead and change it, and I would put that in my pile. No, I don't want that. Put that in my pile. No, I don't want that. Now this guy went around to all the little mom and pop CD used stores on the East Coast, but he also knew what he had, and he knew how rare or how out of print or how valuable they were, so he put an actual price on them. He had 2 copies of this CD, Beyond the Gates, Eyes of Horror, and he said, you know, he was all, you know, let me see, check my friend John, do you want a copy of this Possessed CD? Really hard to find. I said, yeah. And he said, it's $50. Well, I heard 15. I said, yeah, sure. And he goes, no, John, 50. Well, oh, no. At the time, it was like, that was too much. That was too rich for my blood. Probably still is. But anyway, he just got one. So maybe 3-4 months later, he and I decided we were going to go to Kansas City, Missouri, and hit every CD warehouse. And at the time, there were probably 7 or 8. Now there is one in Springfield, Missouri, and one in Lincoln, Nebraska, and that's the only 2 in my area that I know of. So if anybody knows of any other CD warehouses in my area, hit me up. But we hit every one, and I was finding all these gems. He was finding all these gems, all this cool shit. And I'm looking through one of the stores, $7.99. $7.99. Now, if that was today and that was sold back, it would have been checked on the internet. They would have seen that it goes for a lot of money, and they would have either sold it on the internet or they would have priced it accordingly. So we wouldn't find this today, even if it was used for $7.99. That's what's missed. The other thing that's missed is you don't have as many CD stores anymore, and you don't have as much. You don't have as many people selling CDs. You don't have many people buying CDs. So your chances of going into a record store and coming out with some really cool gems is slim to none if you have a collection anywhere this size. If you're just starting out, your chances are you're going to find something good pretty much every time you go in. You're probably going to find some good deals as well. But when you're down to the point where you're looking for certain items, it's not. And I still, when I go to a record store, I still have that exasperation, that holy shit attitude, and I just freak out when I find something just totally cool that I would never expect that I'd find in a CD store, especially a used one in my area. And I must look like a spastic, and people turn around and they look and like, what the fuck's wrong with that guy? But I don't think that's not common. It isn't common, and I'm not a normal person. But I really think that a lot of that is lost on us because of the internet. There's a lot we can say good about the internet. It brings us all together. It gives us all the ability to intermingle and to network with each other. It gives another avenue for bands. Bandcamp is great for the bands. Gives bands a voice across the ocean, across the world. But again, it also gives people the opportunity to get a hold of something and then sell it for outrageous prices because they know that everybody wants it and it's rare, so they jack up the prices. And so then anytime it's sold on eBay or on Discogs, that's the price people put on it because, well, somebody else sold it for that. Or there's the douchebag that will load it up on the internet so everybody can take it. And I'm guilty just like anybody else, but the things that I did and the things I took off the internet were things that were way out of print, long gone, that the only way you can find them anymore is paying $400. And I know for a fact the bands don't even have them because I hit the bands up first and they did not have them. And so I don't feel bad or guilty about that whatsoever because the only person that I'm fucking over is the jackass that's selling it for $400. That's the person I'm fucking over. But everything else is it's just a shitty deal for bands these days. And so I hope that the younger people that watch this video, if anybody watches it, I hope you understand and can respect and be so proud of the fact that you have such an easy time of it. And I don't want to sound like some old 75 gray-haired old man with a cane going, oh, I had it so rough when I was a boy. That's not the point here. The point is that you guys have a great opportunity now. Utilize it, but also embrace embrace these, embrace CDs, embrace physical copies. It's okay to like downloads. It's okay. I realize not everybody has room to put shelves. I get it. Not everybody has room to do that, but doesn't mean that if there's a CD you really, really, really like, that you can't go flip out 10, 15 bucks and buy it. Because I'll tell you, trust me, get a CD you really like, sit in your easy chair, get a 6-pack of whatever you drink or a bottle of whatever you drink, whatever you do to relax, whatever you do to unwind, doesn't matter what it is, kick back quietly, put on some headphones and crank the motherfucker up and just look through the liner notes. Start read. I'm not a big lyric guy, but read the lyrics, look at the pictures, spark your interest, and then start maybe searching stuff that you're seeing on there on the internet as you're listening to the music. And yeah, you can probably do that with an MP3. You can do that while you're listening to iTunes. You could go on, search, and probably find a booklet online and everything. But there's just something about it. It's relaxing. You don't have to be typing. You can just sit back and listen to it. Because while you're fucking around with all that stuff, instead of just laying back, relaxing, and just kind of looking at things, you're missing something. because there's all sorts of stuff going on in the music that you could be missed, that you'd be catching and you're missing because you're checking, whatever. Again, I'm not here to lecture. Again, I'm not saying that if you download and that's it, that's the wrong thing to do. Just pay for it. That's all I have to say. Pay for it. Help support the bands. Do it if you can. If you like something really well, now in this day and age, tell people about it. Don't keep it to yourself. Spread it around. Spread the word. Let people know these guys are kick-ass. And hit the band up. Let them know that you think they're kick-ass. Do whatever you can. If you hear a band that's kick-ass, hit me up. Say, have you heard these guys before? And if I come back with that, if I come back with a no, well, you'll know if I've heard of them. If you come back and you see a picture of their, see a picture of their discography on the reply, I've heard of them. That's kind of the smart ass in me, and I apologize. But if I haven't, I love checking out new bands, whether it's new bands that were around in the 80s that I've missed or new bands that are around now. So I hope that this was informative. I hope that was enjoyable at the very least. So anyway, until next time, everybody, stay metal.